Okay, I'd like to call the May 27th, 2021 Zoning Commission meeting to order. I'd like to remind, you want to go ahead and do roll call?
Okay, Mr. Axelm?
Here.
Ms. Horton? Mr. Hung? Ms. Stalter?
Yes. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Our agenda is only to entertain the motion that we were discussing the last time on case 821. I want to remind everyone that in our previous meeting, the public portion of the meeting was closed. We have already heard from the applicant, and we have already heard from the staff. And so we are here just to discuss the motion. It's our understanding. The last time that we were here, it was my understanding and the commission's understanding that a split vote meant no recommendation went to the trustees. Since that time, we discovered that the split vote was not an acceptable consequence, and therefore we have to come together to come with some sort of a majority understanding. So that's the purpose of our meeting this evening. And with that, I just want to make certain that we are following the rules. We have a quorum. We have had the notifications that have gone out in the time that we are required to have. The last time we were here, everything seemed copacetic. There weren't any members of the commission that felt like they needed to recuse themselves. Has anyone had any other occurrences that changes that? The last time we met, our legal representative was not available because of other professional commitments. So if you have any questions that you might want to ask her, this would be an appropriate time before we entertain or go to about our business. Any questions? I have one, but I have to look it up. Okay. And I think I know the answer. I just want to make certain. I have been reading that the Biden administration is pitching the $2 trillion infrastructure and jobs plan, and that bill has not been written, or it is in the process of being written and may be entertained before Friday. Are you aware of that, and is there anything within that that we might need to know? That's all I needed to know. Thank you. All right. So, Madam Secretary, could you go back to the minutes by chance and let us know what that last motion was that we had on the table? You don't have them? Okay. Thank you, Max.
So a couple things. Your last motion, if I remember correctly, was a motion to approve with the conditions that were given by staff. That ended in a 2-2 split decision. Dawn has suggested that you'll probably want to start with a new motion because that one did not pass or fail. So it could be that same motion, I suppose, or a different motion, but you'll want to start with a new motion. And I have these recommendations. I could read them to you if you'd like. Okay. So the recommendations that you were discussing at the last meeting, first, to allow the 58-acre area, which is to be placed under conservation by the Beavercreek Wetlands Association, to be counted towards the open space requirements for the proposed PUD. Second, any specific site plan submitted for this PUD must include the following information. A proof of communication with the Greene County Floodplain Administrator, and a detailed summary of techniques which will be employed when developing in or near the floodplain. B, a traffic impact study which has been approved by the Greene County engineer. C, proof of communication with the holders of easements for overhead electric lines, noting how the configuration of the neighborhood takes such easements into consideration. That shall be reviewed and approved by any agencies deemed applicable by the Community Development and Risk Department. D, an environmental impact study determining the existence of any endangered species or their habitats on the parcel, and a detailed summary of techniques which will be employed when developing the site, such that it conforms to all laws and regulations pertaining to the existence of endangered species or their habitats. E, a detailed summary of site development techniques which will be employed to minimize impact on the wetlands and wooded areas on or near the parcel, to be reviewed and approved by any agencies deemed applicable by the Community Development and Risk Department. And 3, any site plan submitted for this PUD will be subject to the approval of any agency or entity with jurisdiction or authority over any aspect of the proposed development, or to any other entity at the discretion of the Community Development and Risk Department. So those were the recommendations that were being considered during the last motion.
I also recall something about a leach bed being looked at by the health department for the properties surrounding the parcel, if in fact they had leach beds. Is there anything else you guys recall? After having heard those, is there a motion you all are ready to bring forward?
By the way, Kristen, I think we're supposed to share this mic tonight. I just thought I'd let you know that. That's what I've been told. Since I clumsily went through the last motion, I will clumsily go through this one. I'd like to make a motion to recommend the application with the conditions set forth by Mr. McConnell just now, which are the staff's recommendations, along with the recommendation just stated by our chair. Ann, can you repeat that part about the leach bed?
I can. It's the, but I'm stumbling here a minute on whether it's Greene County Soil or if it's the health department that looks at those leach beds. Health
That'd be the health
department. So the health department to look at the impact of the development on the existing leach beds that are adjacent to the property.
May I suggest a phrasing for that? That Greene County Public Health will review and approve any specific site plan to ensure minimal to no impact on any surrounding leach bed infrastructure. Is that an acceptable way to word that?
I'm satisfied that that's just fine.
Does that language take into consideration a pre-assessment of those existing? That's what that infers, does it not?
Yeah, to me that infers that any specific site plan will have had to address any potential issues to get the approval of Greene County Public Health. Yes.
Okay. I would need to have a second.
Mr. Axthelm?
Yes.
Ms. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hung? No. Ms. Stalter?
No. The last time we met, the public portion of the meeting was open. It remains closed, but in that there were some general rules that were set to keep applause and boos and that sort of thing at bay, please. This is not we are volunteers. This isn't always a fun thing for us to be doing. I think we have to have some discussion, and so the last place we were was we went through the criteria that were listed in the conditions for zoning changes from agricultural to a residential PUD. If I recall, we were hung up on general health and safety, which was item number 2, followed by the traffic study of item number 5, and there was something about item number 8 that someone will have to refresh my memory about. 2, 3, 4, 8.
I have to recall it was 2, 3, 4, and 8. On those particular points, if we're in a discussion portion before we present another motion, I think it's important to raise the elephant in the room, which is the possibility of annexation of this particular property into the city of Beavercreek. It's not a condition that is in our criteria, so it's not something that we're specifically supposed to look at. But I think it's important to point out that there is a possibility that this property could be annexed into the city. If the property is annexed in the city, this township will no longer have any control over how it's to be developed. It'll be developed by the people of the city of Beavercreek. This is something that I don't take particularly lightly. I am not a fan of the tacit warfare that exists between townships and cities, and those of us who who deal in this sort of area understand that there is sort of a merry war going on between cities and townships in Ohio. So this is not something that I personally take very lightly. I'm aware of what's going on. I'm fully cognizant and aware that that Mr. McIntyre has property. He has property rights too. But at the same time, I guess to voice where I'm finding my issue, it really has to do with the roads. And I think I said it before in the last meeting, I'm not seeing any evidence that would lead me personally to conclude that there will not be an issue regarding any development of that area. I listed a couple of things down in my notes, and I think it's uncontested that Kingsway is 22 feet wide. I think it's uncontested that Fair Trail is 27 feet wide. And in the application itself, an engineer opined that these widths were not sufficient. If it's not sufficient back then, I don't know why it's sufficient now. As such, because one of the important criteria here is 2, 3, and 4, specifically 2 and 4 relate to health, safety, and general welfare. That's number 2. And 4, that whether or not the site is accessible from current or planned public thoroughfares. And I'm just not seeing that criteria met here with the application that's before us. Unfortunately, I think the public portion and the testimony and hearing portion is done. I don't think we can take any additional testimony or information on that. So I'm just left with what we have. And that's why my vote hasn't changed.
I'm in pretty much the same place you are, John, and I usually have a lot of compassion for applicants. I think it takes a lot of vision and foresight to encourage, to bring something like this forward. I think it's something that people spend a lot of time thinking very deeply about and make deliberate moves in their lives to do it. And they come to us looking for that approval, if you will. But the situation here is a little bit more unique because we've seen the growth and we've seen what has happened within the township, and I don't think it's been done without vision, without some. I mean, everybody that I work with has always been very conscientious about safety. This is unique because we do have where engineers in the past have said that there's no room for expansion. In our most recent documents for looking at traffic and thoroughfares, we're really, in Beavercreek Township, looking at a maximum point for change. There's a true bifurcation in decision-making that's taking place. And I think that that thoroughfare is where I'm hung up. I wish that I could say, oh, well, a site plan that has some sort of a roundabout or some sort of a smart growth plan, a more developed site plan, but we're in a step right before that, and it's so hard to envision how that could happen and not have a negative impact, and that's where I'm stuck. Now, the other place that seems like we could talk about, because I could truly be persuaded on item number 2 if I could get past item number 5. And that is not to say that our engineers, our fire department, and the brilliant minds that we have can't come up with some reasonable solutions. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I'm not convinced that the solutions aren't going to have a long-term problem. And I could be convinced. The other place that I'm hung up is on density, and I think that we as a group could come up with some sort of a density parameter or boundary that we could make a recommendation to the trustees on that would be consistent with things that we've done in the past. That's just where I am right now.
I'm in the same boat. I'm very sympathetic of the thoroughfare situation, just as all of you are. As I read the zoning resolution, though, section 17.06.6 talks about how we go about making our recommendation for an RPUD, and it states that the zoning commission shall find that the facts submitted with the application and presented at the public hearing and any modifications, amendments, or supplementary conditions satisfy the standards and criteria for planned unit development approval as per section 1706.9 of this resolution, which are the 10 points that we discussed last time. So the combination of our conditions plus those 10 points need to satisfy that section, in my opinion. And I agree, 22-foot wide road with no sidewalks is not safe, but I'm also not the county engineer. I'm not the one that pursues the traffic study. And with an RPUD, it puts us in a difficult situation in that we don't get those things at the time of the rezoning application. It's my understanding if we were going straight to an R1, an R1AA, that the site plan would be a part of that. No, it's not? There's no specific site plan requirement at that time, right? Okay. So in this case, you do have to go through a more stringent process with a specific site plan. And I'm of the opinion that I want to hear from the experts, which it puts us in a difficult situation that we don't have those findings from the experts at this time. So having a condition as recommended by staff that a traffic impact study be approved by the county engineer. And it's my understanding that we have a relatively newer county engineer, from what I've heard, that has a very high focus on safety. So that's where I'm coming from in my vote, not because I want to disrupt the lives of everybody in this room. I want to interpret the case as the zoning resolution specifies before us.
So I just have a question to you, Max. My question is, can we hear from the applicant one more time regarding the width of the roads that were brought up in 1993 versus what's changed now to make those roads not be as impactful for development? I guess it would be possibly additional information because that's what we're all hung up on. The difference between where they are with how they feel with the roads, with the access being the 20 foot, 27 feet and the 22 feet. And we do have information that he has stated in this packet back in 1993 that it was a concern at the time when they were developing Stonehill Village. However, as we are proceeding forward and trying to develop that property currently, it appears there's no longer an issue with it. So in that regard, I was curious if you would be able to speak to that.
Because it is the applicant, and you can ask questions of the applicant to clarify for purposes of you making a determination and developing a new motion.
Because honestly, I don't see if we're right now, again, stuck at the same exact point, we're ever going to be able to move forward. So I mean, there's two strong opinions regarding width of streets, which obviously cannot be done. There are two opinions regarding a homeowner, landowner being able to, develop their property. So otherwise, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to move forward.
Well, there's a couple things that you all need to think about. First of all, since the motion that was previously presented to this board twice now has come up 2 and 2, I think that you have to come up with a new motion. There has to be something contained in that motion in which is different, because obviously where you are now at 2 and 2, our code does not allow for that. It requires a majority in order for a recommendation to go forward. So, I understand that you all right now are stuck on certain provisions. I think that you need to see if you can craft something that helps you in getting past those certain revisions. I would just remind you as well, and just in sort of a comment to Mr. Axelhelm, is at the specific site plan stage, that comes to you all as well, and it comes to you first as well. And so it is not as though some of those concerns that you have, you will not ever have an opportunity to deal with again on a much more specific basis at a time when you will have some of those experts having weighed in. A approval of zoning doesn't necessarily approve the development. And so, you know, I don't know if that sort of helps in how you might craft a new motion, but I think it's important that that's what you're going to have to do.
Don, this may be a question for you, because I do not want to overstep the boundaries of conditions that we may put on this particular approval if we are to maybe introduce another condition which might help us kind of get through this. So my question for you is this: are we allowed, in your opinion, to give a condition on the number of lots that are created in this particular RPUD?
I think you can address density, but I don't know that you can specifically specify at this stage lots. That's a site plan issue.
So that's what I was wondering. I was like, the density, here's a lot number. So, all right. I'm just reading through what's here, and I'm thinking about what we can do.
Speak out loud, it's fine. I think we have to get at those conditions that are most concerning to each of us.
Okay. So obviously with traffic being a concern on both sides, the number one regarding the allowing of the 58 acres being counted towards open space requirements, as we have discussed, and how that will impact how density is calculated. Would that be something that you would consider removing and not allowing that to count towards the open space requirements in moving forward in terms of traffic? John?
Thanks, Kristen. I am certainly willing to consider that. I'm just trying to do some quick math in my head as to what that would mean. Right now we've got this application where the open space is put towards the density. So if you take it out, what's the number? And I'm crunching it through my head right now. So give me a second here. I'm thinking.
Max, could you please pull up the parcel, the picture of the parcel for us? Okay. And I would say the next slide is probably going to be the comparison of those densities around it, I would guess.
If I may just point out, I was informed by resident comments that the density for Beaver Hills Estates is incorrect here. The number of homes that I used is from a PUD build-out chart. Many of the neighborhoods were 100% complete when I took over, so I did not check to see if they were correct, the number of homes listed. I believe there's actually 57 homes in Beaver Hills Estates. My actual calculations put it at just under 0.4 units per acre. So that's something that needs to be brought up.
At some point in time, did you do an average on that?
Yeah, I believe we did at the last meeting, but we can do a very quick one right now.
And did we read the number of trips per household? No, somewhere we read that. Is it 2 trips per?
No, according to Anna Ramirez of Miami Valley
Yes.
Regional Planning, she said it's 10 trips per day per household. Unless I'm wrong, Max.
You're correct, yeah. Which equals the proposed 250 homes, 2,500 trips per day. The average of these densities is 0.97, if you want to round up, 0.98. So just under 1 unit per acre, which is just taking all, sorry? Yeah. Roughly 2, it's about 6, divided by 6. So that's what the average density is. I'm just going to recheck because I see some faces that are maybe skeptical, so I'm just going to recheck my math here.
So I'm going to abandon math for just a second here, but I suggest a proposal, okay? So I'm looking at the Kingsway Drive neighborhood. It has a current density of 0.4015, whatever
Sure.
it is. And I believe that number is derived from taking the number of lots and dividing it by the number of acres.
Correct.
So we know, based on the numbers that we have right now, that Kingsway Drive is 22 feet wide, and that thoroughfare apparently is sufficient for like a 22, you know what I mean, like a 22-foot road was fine at the time for a subdevelopment with a density of 0.401, whatever. So it seems to make sense to me that if the road at Kingsway Drive can handle that density, that as long as the development, the current proposed development fits somewhere near that density, then at least we know that Kingsway Drive, which is the most narrow of roads, can handle the traffic. I mean, that's my thought at least. And I did some quick math. So if you look at the current acreage of the proposed PUD and you multiply it by the density, that results in 71 lots, approximately. So just, this, again, if we use the density of Kingsway Drive and apply it to the current PUD, which is 178 acres, you get 71. That's the math. Again, without having, I'm not an engineer. I don't pretend to be an engineer. My dad's an engineer, but I'm not. And one thing we don't have here is I don't know is Spindletop supposed to be the density for Stonehill Village?
The neighborhood of Spindletop, the subdivision Spindletop, which is directly to the east of the parcel, that includes Fairtrail and Turfland and all that, just that one section of Stonehill Village.
Okay, all right, thanks. Just as a consideration, I mean, just, again, the spitball in here, I'm thinking that, Kingsway Drive is the most narrow of roads. The density it handles right now is 0.4, whatever it is. Therefore, it seems reasonable to me that, that similar density might be reasonable for the new PUD. But that's just a thought out there.
So yeah,
We'll hold discussion until this is over. This got us in trouble the last time, I think. Okay, you want to repeat where you left off?
Sure, my thought was completed, and my thought was simply this. And again, I'm not an engineer, don't pretend to be, I'm just trying to figure out what other conditions we can put in there to try to make this work. My concern is with the load of vehicles on a street. As I said before, the most narrow street that we have is Kingsway Drive. It's 22 feet wide, apparently. And its neighborhood handles a density of 0.401. That's acres versus lots. So, or I should say lots divided by acres. So that's the density there. So we know Kingsway Drive is sufficient for that. My thought out there is that if we impose a condition that limits the density, as Don's recommended, to something similar to that, I think it would satisfy my thoughts as to whether or not the width of Kingsway Drive is sufficient to handle this particular PUD. On Kristen's thought, though, if you take the 53 acres out of the proposed, I'm sorry, what? 58, great, okay. If you take the 58 out and you have 250 lots, the density is actually somewhere over 2. So it's 2 point something. So that would be the density if you removed the 58 acres.
What about, okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. $178 subtracted by the 53, is that what you're saying? 58, so it's 170. 112. Have we deeply considered, so we've talked about the traffic, and I think if we look at the lower density in comparison to these numbers, and are you satisfied that the chart that you have given to us is accurate?
To the best of my knowledge, with the information I have, yes.
Okay. My next question is about water flow, drainage, and the impact of that in an accumulated effect in the area. Have we thought about that?
I guess could you clarify a little bit more for me?
Sure. So there'll be the lift station that will occur, correct?
Yes, in order to get on sanitary sewer, we've confirmed with Greene County Sanitary Engineering that it would pretty much have to be a lift station.
That it would have to be a lift station. And where would that pump to?
My understanding is that it would pump into the sewage that's currently serving Spindletop.
And the accumulated amount on that is supposed, where does it go after it's pumped and it connects to that? What happens to it?
It's added to the sewage system, which has, according to sanitary engineering, as we spoke about this,
Yes.
there was no concerns brought up about the sanitary system's ability to handle
that.
this additional capacity, none whatsoever.
Okay. All right.
But again, that could be something that could be placed as a condition on the approval that, say, sanitary engineering, signs off on the sanitary system's capacity to handle any additional influx from a neighborhood.
Can you write those points down, please? All right. That's number 5. What was the next one on our list? Wait a minute, John, are you in a place with 5 now that you can start to live with?
I was really only, I think at the last hearing, really only had, my objections were limited to 2, 3, and 4, so I was okay with 5 as it was. So you can move on if you want to.
Let's hit 5 just to make sure I'm good. Oh, we weren't hung up on 5, okay. 8 was number 8. That's where I thought we were, okay. All right. Can you do it?
Dawn, if we were to put conditions on the density, how best can we craft that? I mean, do we need to state that it must meet or exceed any adjacent or connecting neighborhoods? Can we put a specific parcel density condition on it based on reasoning like John was having?
Okay, so I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, but in the past, we have done it as a not to exceed a density of.
And we can state a number and that becomes a condition?
As long as it's consistent with the land use plan, it cannot be more restrictive than the land use plan, as I understand that. I could be wrong, but
I mean, the thing I would remind you of is when you do this, that you are, this is legislation that you're putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so any change to that becomes very difficult, whether it's, that's why, one, if you're going to do a number that it, well, I should say this, yours is a recommendation. It doesn't become legislation until it's at the trustee level. But, you know, there are obviously things can change during the course of development. And so you don't want to tie anyone's hand, good or bad, by setting a specific number that it has to be. I would say if you're going to try and craft something like that, that you do it in a not to exceed type fashion so that it allows the flexibility. But I mean, I think you, again, have to be careful keeping in mind that there are certain things that are going to occur at the site plan level that can affect all of those things, depending on, you know, where the various, you know, agencies and utilities and different things like that come into play. All of that sort of is looked at that stage usually anyways. So I don't know if I'm answering your question
Sure.
directly, but.
I have a really quick question. Regarding density, would you prefer to do a density or would you prefer to exclude the 58 acres?
Keep in mind that the 58 acres affects the density. I mean, it's going to affect it one way or the other. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
We're not facing an issue of shall exceeds or whatever. We're excluding A or 1 from the recommendation.
I mean, I'm just going to throw one other option out at you, just so as you all are struggling to craft something, there is an allowance for you to even make a recommendation not to approve the application as well. So I'm just throwing that out. That's a third. If you cannot come to something in which you can all agree on to approve, the question is, can you agree on not approving either? So, you know, these are all options, but I guess I'm not sure, I'm still unsure what the difference is and whether you, I mean, I understand taking your idea of taking that out of the open space, but that in and of itself affects the density.
Okay, so would you be willing, and we'll have to see how this all goes, to recommend, if we do a motion, taking out the recommendation for number 1 regarding the 58 acres, leaving in A, B, C, D, E, as we've discussed in part 2, including the leach bed, and then adding in a D, where we also include the sanitary impact study. And then leaving also in 3, where we talk about the site plan being submitted subject to approval of any agency or entity within the jurisdiction. Or at that point, we could also add in a specific density and leave in the acreage.
John, before you say anything, because you're really smart, so I'm just going to say what I think for a minute, because you know I'm touchy-feely. So, so here's where my brain is wiggling like Jell-O, and it is around the fact that what you say about the density and the exclusionary pieces about that 58 acres. I think that's potato, and it is just all about what ends up being recorded as law. And I'm kind of apprehensive about that because it is very rigid. It's very rigid because I've been in where your hands are tied down the road because we came up with that. It seemed right at the time, but you know, when you get into the thick of it, it's not serving us as well as we thought it would. The other side of it is, and this is where that empathy piece comes in, so you're going to have to hit me back with logic, okay? And that is, we are not under any legal obligation to make a zoning change. That is like a safety net for me when I'm making a decision. But in the same vein, we are not to restrict the landowner from their ability to progress. And I am not convinced that by putting the conditions and the restrictions on it, it serves the landowner. I'm not convinced of that. It serves us to make a decision. The other side of that is the ultimate question we had 2 meetings ago was, is this land suitable for zoning change? And that is what it comes down to, with the exception of the safety piece. And by borrowing from one side of it and putting it on another side and taking a look at those numbers, I'm still in a place of uncertainty. Now, talk to my brain. That doesn't need to be Jell-O. I know it doesn't need to be.
Here we go. I think that I'm listening to Dawn here, and what I'd like to do before we continue to tax our brain about what conditions we at this before us can agree on, I think we should, and I would like to make a motion for the commission not to recommend this application be approved to the trustees and see how the vote goes. Again, we've talked about this a lot. This is our 3rd time coming down here, and we don't have to recommend, and we don't have to not recommend. We can take either one, but what we haven't tested is whether or not we're in a position where we say, you know what, I don't think we can recommend it. It doesn't mean necessarily that it can't be changed. It's just at this time we don't recommend it. So I'd like to test that theory, and I'd like to make a motion that the commission not recommend the application as submitted. Even with the even with the staff recommendations, again, I want to place that motion out there that we not recommend this, even with the staff conditions and recommendations to the trustees.
Can I just change the wording of that just so it's more
Yes,
clear?
you may. Please do.
That you make a motion to recommend denial of the application.
I heard her. I heard her. I'd like to make a motion to not to deny the application, or recommendation to deny the application to the board, of the Township Board of Trustees.
If there's no second, it dies for a lack of second, and then a new motion has to be made.
I'll second it.
Just so everyone's clear, a second doesn't necessarily mean you're approving the motion. It just means that you're second or allowing the motion to go forward, allow for further discussion and a vote.
Is there any further discussion on this motion?
Yeah, I'd like to understand, if we deny the application, what are the next steps for the applicant?
It's a recommendation for denial to the Board of Trustees. The matter will still go to the Board of Trustees. The application will still go to the board in a similar fashion as it is done here. The motion or the Board of Trustees can either accept your recommendation, they can send it back, or they can make their own decisions. There's a number of things it can do, but it will go up then to the board to make those decisions.
And Don, just to clarify, a yes vote means yes, we are recommending to deny, correct?
Yes means denial.
Thank you.
If it were to go forward to the trustees, the staff recommendations would follow in a report to them, and the applicant would have a hearing, or they would hear the side of the applicant and the side of the staff and the side of the public as well, correct?
Mr. Axelm?
No.
Ms. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hung?
Yes.
Ms. Stalter? Yes.
I'd like to move to adjourn this meeting. Aye.
Mr. Axelm? Ms. Horton? Mr. Hung? Ms. Stalter? Thank you.